So you can have a parallelogram that's either a rhombus or it's a rectangle. Then you can have a parallelogram that is both. So a square is a parallelogram that is both a rhombus and rectangle. It's both of those things. So if we say, well, a rhombus has 4 congruent sides, so does a square. If we say a rectangle has 4 congruent 90-degree angles, well, so does a square. It has everything that both of those have. So you may want to make yourself a note that if something is a square, it has all of the characteristics that were listed from above. Because it's everything. Rhombus, rectangle, parallelogram. It's the most specific name if it has all of those characteristics. Now we have a square. So what is a square? Everything that is a rhombus and everything that is a rectangle. So think of all of those properties, mark it in your picture. We see that square EFGH diagonals intersect at J, point J, right here. Given that GJ is 15, that's labeled, find the indicated measure. So remember a rhombus, 4 congruent sides. Diagonals perpendicular. Diagonals bisect the opposite angles. Well, as I mark these, remember it's also a rectangle, which means all 4 angles are congruent. So I'm not going to put different marks here because all 4 angles are congruent and 90 degrees. Well, that helps me out a little bit because now I know how to divide evenly up those 2 congruent angles. Also in a rectangle, besides having those 4 90-degree angles in a rectangle, what about the diagonals? The diagonals are congruent too. That's for a rectangle. Okay, let's see what we can do for these missing measures. Angle EJF. EJF. Guess what? We already marked it because we knew it was a rhombus, 90 degrees. How about FH? FH. Well, if this guy said 15 and we marked all these the same, this one was 15 and this one was 15. Put those together, 15 plus 15, and we get 30. See? Not too bad once you label your whole picture. Each figure is a parallelogram, so that is given to us. It is a parallelogram. Not asking us, is it? It is. Identify the special type of parallelogram, so we will either call it a rectangle, a rhombus, or a square. Explaining our reasoning, giving one of the properties listed on the list of properties side. So what do I see here? Nothing about the sides, nothing about the angles. I see about diagonals. So my reasoning here is going to be something about the diagonals. Remember these guys here? These are called the diagonals. Well, I see that the diagonals have different marks, so I know the diagonals are not congruent. What I do see, though, is the diagonals are intersecting at a right angle. The diagonals are perpendicular. So because the diagonals are perpendicular, I look back to my list of properties and I see which one that goes for. Do you want to look back at your list of properties? Do you see that it's for a rhombus? So that's what we will answer. This is a rhombus because the diagonals are perpendicular. So rhombus is what we call that one. Let's take a look at the next one. Now here you might see, oh, only 2 sides are congruent. However, remember we were told that these are all parallelograms. Parallelograms has opposite sides congruent. So if this has 1 slash, the opposite side should have 1 slash. If this has 1 slash, the opposite side should have 1 slash. Similarly, if this is a right angle, across from it should be the same size angle, right? Opposite angles are congruent in a parallelogram. Then if the angles next to each other are supposed to add up to 180 and this one's 90, this one also should be 90. Similarly, this one will be 90. So because it's a parallelogram, I was able to fill in all of those things. Now I ask myself, what do I see in the picture? I see that the sides are all congruent and the angles are all congruent, or I can say they're all 90 degrees. They're all right angles. So which one does it make? Well, the sides being congruent makes it a rhombus. The angles being congruent makes it a rectangle. So if it's both, that means it's a square. So we call this a square. Square is the correct answer because it's both a rhombus and a rectangle. Let's look at the last one. Again, it's a parallelogram. That was told to me at the beginning. Therefore, if one angle is a right angle, the opposite is right, and the consecutive is right as well. What I see here is that all the angles are congruent, or 90 degrees. What property does that go with? Rectangle. So in my last one, I have a rectangle because all the angles are congruent. Rectangle.